The water ran cold over smooth stones as Nita knelt beside the narrow forest creek, the morning light catching strands of her raven-black hair. She held her worn deerskin pouch in her lap, fingers working patiently along a torn seam. Each stitch was small, deliberate, steady as her breathing. The surface of the creek mirrored her face, high cheekbones, sun-browned skin, fierce eyes framed by long, dark lashes. Eyes that once held the fire of a whole tribe behind them, now reflecting nothing but the quiet ache of a woman alone. There had been a time when the mountains echoed with laughter, the crackle of campfires and the strong, reassuring voices of elders. But last winter had taken too much. Cold nights, little food, sickness that swept through the camp like a merciless wind. What remained of the band had been forced westward by soldiers, leaving behind the sick, the old, the slow, and Nita, who had stayed back too long searching for her younger cousin and missed the departure. When she finally reached the valley where they were supposed to gather, all she found were abandoned ashes and tracks swallowed by drifting snow. Since then, she had lived in a small hide-covered lodge at the edge of a white settlement, a lonely borderland where she belonged to neither world. She spoke enough English to trade, enough silence to keep others at a distance. Folks in Aspen Hollow looked at her with that familiar mixture, half caution, half need. Some came to her for sage bundles, crushed roots, and teas that soothed fevers. Others crossed the street when she walked by, whispering as if she carried storms beneath her skin. But Nita felt more like smoke than thunder. Thin, fading, drifting where the wind pushed her. She tied the last knot on her pouch and rose to her feet. The air smelled of pine sap and damp earth. A hawk cut across the sky above her, its shadow sliding over her shoulders like a reminder of things once sacred. She followed the path out of the trees and toward the town, her steps silent, sure the way her father had taught her before the world changed. At the trading post, the usual murmur of voices quieted when she entered. Old Jenkins behind the counter lifted his chin, but didn't quite meet her gaze. "You have more herbs today?" he asked. Nita set her bundles on the table. Yarrow, rabbit brush, wild mint. His hands moved fast, almost nervous as he examined them. She stood still, calm as stone, letting him rush around her as though stillness itself unsettled him. While he counted coins, her attention drifted around the room. Stacked flour sacks, lanterns with dusty glass, bolts of cloth faded from the sun. Then something caught her eye, a scrap of paper nailed crookedly to the board near the door. She stepped closer. Widowed rancher seeking help with a child needs a woman of strength, someone with a heart steady enough for wind, work, and quiet. Rayner Ranch, 12 miles north. New beginnings possible. Her breath paused. Those two final words, new beginnings, felt like someone had spoken them directly into her ribs. She'd heard those words before, spoken by missionaries, by travelers, by men with polished boots. But this time, the phrase didn't sound like a promise meant to lure someone. It sounded raw, a little weary, maybe even honest. Nita traced the edges of the paper with her eyes, taking in the rough handwriting. She pictured a man living somewhere beyond the rolling hills, tending fences, feeding animals, trying to raise a child without a woman's guidance. A man whose loneliness must be carved deep enough that he would ask a stranger for help. For a moment, she felt the old pull in her chest, something between longing and fear. She had survived winter, hunger, and loss. But the emptiness following survival, that was the part gnawing at her. She folded the paper's message into her memory, picked up her pouch, and walked home along the dirt trail. That night, she sat by her small fire, its warmth flickering against the lodge walls. She held a sheet of paper, crinkled, precious, offered by a shopkeeper months ago, and a stub of charcoal. Her English was broken, uneven like the path she walked. But truth did not need perfect words. Slowly she wrote, "I know land, I know work. I am not afraid of storms or silence. If you need help with the child, I can try. I am also looking for a new beginning." When she finished, she stared at the simple lines. Plain, honest, bare as winter branches. But sometimes the truest things were the ones spoken without decoration. She folded the letter, pressed it to her chest for a quiet heartbeat, and whispered to the fire, "Let this find the right heart." And in that moment, without ceremony, Nita chose a direction for her life. one that would carry her far beyond the shadows of her past. Dawn rolled across the prairie in a muted shade of gray, the kind that made the world feel half asleep and half wounded. The wind pushed low over the grasslands, carrying the scent of cold earth and last night's frost. From the center of that wide, weathered landscape came the steady thunk, thunk, thunk of a hammer striking wood. Cole Rayner drove another fence post into the frozen ground, muscles tight beneath his worn flannel shirt. The man looked as if he had been carved from the same rough timber he worked with. Broad-shouldered, sun-marked, quiet strong. A man shaped by land, loss, and too many mornings exactly like this one. 3 winters had passed since he buried Sarah on the hill overlooking the north pasture. 3 winters, yet the grief still clung to him like dust on old boots. He didn't talk about it, didn't share memories, didn't invite anyone into that hollowed-out part of his chest. Cole simply worked, sunrise to dark, trying to outrun something that always stayed a step behind. When the fence post finally stood firm, he wiped sweat from his brow despite the chill and turned toward the ranch house. Smoke curled from the chimney in thin ribbons. Inside, he knew, lay the only piece of his heart that still mattered. Clara. She was 7, small, solemn, soft-voiced, the kind of child who moved like a shadow and never caused trouble. She rarely spoke anymore, but she drew, every day, every hour if he let her. Her sketchbook was filled with wide skies, sloping hills, the shape of their old wagon, and always a woman with gentle eyes and loose hair blowing in the wind. Her mother. Cole paused at the doorway, listening. The house was quiet, that familiar, heavy quiet that lived between the walls. Clara sat at the table, her thin shoulders hunched as she shaded in another drawing. He stepped inside, boots heavy on the wood floor. "Morning, Bug," he said softly. Clara didn't answer. She simply turned a page, pencil dancing across it with a kind of fragile determination. Cole's chest tightened. He wished he could reach into that world she drew and pull her back out, but he didn't know how. Words were never his skill, not before Sarah, and certainly not after. He set his gloves on the counter, wondering, just for a fleeting second, if raising Clara alone was a mistake he was doomed to repeat over and over. She needed a woman's guidance, warmth he couldn't recreate, softness his hands didn't know anymore. But asking for help had never been in his nature, which was precisely why he hadn't written that damn notice posted on the board in town. His brother Eli had done it after one too many visits, where he found Cole running himself into the ground and Clara shrinking deeper into silence. Eli's words were gruff, but not unkind. "You need someone around here before the dust starts talking back." Cole had told him to mind his own business. Eli didn't. The first letter arrived 2 weeks later. Cole remembered the moment that envelope landed in his hands. Thick paper, unfamiliar handwriting, a return address that held only 2 words. From Nita. He'd opened it at the kitchen table while Clara watched from behind her sketchbook. The message inside was simple, direct, unpolished. Her English wasn't fluent, but her meaning was clear enough to strike something deep within him. "I know land, I know work. I am not afraid of storms or silence. If you need help with your child, I can try. I am also looking for a new beginning." Cole read the letter once, then again, and again after that. There was a raw honesty in her words. No flowery promises, no desperate pleas. Just the voice of a woman shaped by hardship, but still standing, still steady. He recognized that steadiness. Recognized the loneliness stitched into every line. It matched his own too closely to ignore. He set the letter down and stared at the window, where the winter light bled pale across the yard. His pulse tapped slow, but certain against his ribs. Whoever this Apache woman was, she wasn't afraid of quiet, wasn't afraid of storms, wasn't afraid of starting over. Maybe that was exactly what this ranch needed. He took out a sheet of paper, thin, creased, and held his pen above it for a long, uncertain moment. Writing wasn't something he did well, but truth didn't need elegant hands. Finally, he wrote, "If you can stand the land, the wind, and the silence, then come. Cole Rayner." He folded the letter, sealing it with the same rough gentleness he used when tucking Clara into bed. When he placed it in the outgoing mailbag at the general store, he paused just a heartbeat, long enough to admit he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. A shift, a possibility, a door cracking open. The letter left Aspen Hollow on a southbound stagecoach. And with it, without fully meaning to, Cole Rayner called out across the wide country to a woman wandering the wilderness, inviting her toward the place where both of their lives were about to change. Dawn bled slowly over the mountain ridge, turning the peaks a burning shade of red as the first light spilled across the open prairie. The air was crisp, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Beneath it, a small bay horse trotted steadily through the tall grass, her hooves thudding against the earth with a determined rhythm. Nita sat upright in the saddle, wrapped in a worn doeskin cloak, her long braided hair brushing against her back as the wind tugged at it. She didn't look behind her. The hide lodge she'd lived in for months, patched, lonely, tucked against the pines, was shrinking with every mile she put between it and herself. She hadn't said goodbye to anyone. There was no one left to hear it. Her departure had been silent. No footsteps following her, no voices calling her name. Just the soft creak of saddle leather and the whisper of the morning breeze as she nudged her horse toward a future she had no promise in, only instinct. The prairie stretched before her in wide, weathered waves of golden brown. Mud clung to her horse's legs where the ground was soft from spring melt, slowing their pace, but Nita didn't mind. She leaned forward slightly, guiding the mare around low swells of earth and through narrow gullies. Each breath of wind carried the scent of sage and wild brush, familiar yet distant, like a song she once knew by heart. Hours passed in a quiet, steadfast march. Nita's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, where sky and land met in a blue, endless line. Her thoughts drifted with the miles, carried by the rhythm of hoofbeats and wind. Memories rose in fragments, crisp as carved flint. Her mother's hands, gentle and sure, weaving feathers into her hair before ceremonies. Her father kneeling beside her at the mouth of their lodge, teaching her to judge a storm by the way the clouds curled like restless spirits. Laughter around the fire, the voices of cousins chasing each other along the creek. Warmth, belonging. All gone now, scattered like ashes in winter wind. Nita swallowed hard, tightening her grip on the reins. Those memories were both her strength and her wound. They reminded her who she was and everything she had lost. Yet they also pushed her forward, urging her not to sink into the empty places grief carved inside her. Near midday, the prairie sun climbed high, glowing white-hot through thin clouds. Nita slipped off the horse and walked beside her for a while, giving the mare a rest. Her moccasins brushed against brittle weeds. Insects hummed lazily in the heat. The world felt wide, untamed, indifferent, and strangely welcoming. She stopped at a shallow stream to drink, cupping icy water in her hands. Droplets clung to her bronze skin. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, the sound soft as a prayer. By late afternoon, clouds gathered in swirling streaks across the sky, painted orange, copper, and deep crimson by the sinking sun. Nita slowed her mare to a walk and took in the horizon. The light made the land look alive, rolling hills glowing like embers, distant cottonwoods swaying in slow shadows. For the first time in many months, something stirred inside her. Not sorrow, not fear. Something small, something fragile, like a green sprout pushing through packed earth. Hope. She let the horse rest and stood quietly, watching the sky burn itself out in a blaze of color. A future, she whispered to no one, testing the shape of the idea. It didn't feel as impossible as it once had. The evening wind curled around her, lifting the loose ends of her braid. She breathed it in, the air crisp with the smell of oncoming night. Then she mounted again, guiding her horse toward the faint trail that led north. As the last light faded, a dark silhouette appeared far ahead across the prairie. Angular lines against the glow, unmistakable even from a distance. A house, a barn, a fenced yard, a small cluster of trees fighting the wind. It stood like a quiet sentinel in the vast openness. Rayner Ranch. Nita slowed the mare to a stop, her heart thudding once, then twice in a heavy, deliberate beat. This was the place written in the letter. This was where a widowed rancher lived with a silent child. This was where her path had been leading since the moment she dared write the words "new beginning" with trembling fingers. The prairie exhaled around her, as if acknowledging her arrival. With one last look at the fading sky, Nita nudged her horse forward, toward the wooden house standing steady in the dusk. toward the man who had unknowingly called her across the wild country, toward her fate. The old wooden gate let out a long, weary creak as Nita nudged her horse through it. The sound carried across the open yard, swallowed partly by the steady prairie wind. Dust swirled in small spirals around her mare's hooves, and the late-day sun stretched the shadows long and thin across the hard-packed earth. On the porch, a man stood with one shoulder resting against a post, broad-shouldered, boots planted firm, hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the fading light. Cole Rayner looked as weathered as the land he lived on, a man carved by storms, summers, and every hardship in between. He straightened when he saw her. For a long moment, he just stared. Nita guided her horse closer, her posture upright, steady, almost regal despite the miles behind her. The breeze tugged gently at the feathers woven into her braid. Her dark eyes, deep, old-souled, carrying stories no settler would ever fully understand, met Cole's with a calm that made his breath hitch. She was nothing like the women he'd known in town. Not soft-spoken, not polished, not fragile. She was striking, fierce in a quiet, self-contained way. A woman who had endured more than she said and survived more than she showed. The wildness of the frontier didn't cling to her. It bowed to her. Cole stepped down from the porch slowly, boots thudding against the steps. Nita swung off her horse with practiced ease, landing lightly on her feet. The wind shifted between them, carrying the smell of sage, leather, and distant rain. They stood facing each other, silent, unmoving, the moment heavy as an anvil, fresh from the forge. Cole cleared his throat first, though it didn't do much to steady him. "You're Nita?" he asked, voice low and gravelly. She nodded once. "I am." Another stretch of silence fell. Behind her calm expression, Nita measured him carefully. The set of his jaw, the tired slope of his shoulders, the sadness tucked behind his eyes. He looked strong, but not untouched by pain. A man shaped by loss. A man who didn't ask for help unless desperation pushed him to. And yet he'd written the letter. Nita held his gaze steadily, unflinching. Cole finally exhaled and said the only thing that came to him, blunt as a hammer strike, "You can stay, if you want." It wasn't warm, it wasn't welcoming, but it was honest. Nita didn't flinch at his tone. She didn't expect soft words. The land had already taught her that softness was a rarity here. She answered with equal bluntness, her voice low but strong. "If this land accepts me, I will stay." A flicker, small, almost hidden, passed through Cole's eyes. Respect, maybe. Maybe recognition. Maybe something he didn't have the words for. Before either of them spoke again, a movement caught Nita's attention. The front door eased open just a crack, and a small face peeked out. A pair of wide gray-blue eyes, deep with worry and curiosity, stared at her. Clara. The little girl clutched a sketchbook tight against her chest as if it were armor. Nita softened her posture slightly. Not a smile, not a greeting, just a gentle lowering of her shoulders. An unspoken assurance. "I see you. I won't move too fast." Clara didn't step out. She didn't wave. She simply watched, her body half hidden behind the doorframe, ready to retreat if the world shifted even an inch too quickly. Cole glanced back. "That's Clara," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "She keeps to herself." "I understand," Nita murmured. And she did. Children who lost too much always carried silence like a shadow. Cole nodded awkwardly and reached for the mare's reins. "I'll take your horse around to the barn. House is open if you're ready." Nita hesitated only long enough to place her palm briefly on the mare's neck. An acknowledgement, a goodbye to the miles they had endured together. Then she stepped toward the porch, the boards groaning under her weight. The door opened wider as she approached. Clara darted back inside, but not before stealing one more quick look at the stranger whose presence seemed carved from wind and stone. Nita stepped across the threshold. The scent of wood smoke and something faintly sweet, maybe bread from earlier, wrapped around her. The room was tidy but tired, lived in, marked by grief and routine. She set her small pouch gently near the wall. Behind her, the door swung shut with a solid thunk, final, echoing, almost ceremonial. And just like that, with a single step and a closing door, Nita crossed the invisible line between the life she'd survived and the life waiting for her. The frontier outside remained wild and unforgiving. But inside this weathered house, something was beginning, quiet, uncertain, and stronger than either of them knew. The first days on Rainer Ranch broke over Nita like a hard prairie wind. Unpredictable, biting, and honest in a way only the West could be. At sunrise on the third morning, she trudged toward the well with an empty wooden bucket, her palms raw from rope burns she hadn't quite managed to hide. She wrapped the rough rope around her hands, braced her feet, and pulled. Halfway up, the bucket slipped. Water exploded across her boots and soaked the hem of her skirt. The bucket clattered against the well stones before swinging wildly at the end of the rope. Nita froze, jaw tight, breath steaming in the cold morning air. The skin along her fingers had split open again, bright red lines against her sun-browned hands. The pain flared, sharp and immediate, but she didn't make a sound. A few steps away, Cole stood with an armful of fence rails. He didn't say a word, didn't wince, didn't even step forward. He simply watched with those steady, storm-weathered eyes of his, as if waiting to see how she would face the moment. She reeled the bucket back up with slow, controlled motions. No complaint, no frustration spilling over. Only the quiet, relentless determination of someone who had walked through worse storms than spilled water. By midday, she was in the barn learning how to milk a cow that clearly resented her inexperience. The animal kicked twice, snorted loudly, and sent the pail flying. Milk splattered across the straw. She blinked once, breathing slow to keep from stiffening. Behind her, Cole leaned against the barn door, arms crossed loosely over his chest. He didn't scold, didn't sigh in disappointment. He only said in that calm, gravel-deep voice, "Try placing your hand here instead. Gentle. Cows don't take well to nerves." His words weren't warm, but they weren't cold either. They were steady, a kind of steadiness she could trust. She tried again. This time the cow tolerated her touch, barely, but it was enough. The next morning she helped patch a section of the fence. Her stitches in the wire were crooked. Cole fixed them afterward, silent, methodical, but not once did he criticize. He simply nodded toward her bruised fingers and said, "You'll get the hang of it." By the fourth morning, she attempted bread. The smell of burnt dough filled the house so thickly Clara had to open a window with both hands. Nita stared at the blackened crust in disbelief. Cole walked in from the yard, sniffed the air, and raised an eyebrow. "Well," he said, "we can feed it to the chickens." She turned her head, expecting sharpness. Mockery, something cutting. She had known many white men whose humor held barbs. But Cole's face remained flat, almost unreadable, except for a tiny flicker of something like amusement hiding under the corners of his eyes. A flicker gone as soon as she noticed. He grabbed his coat again and returned outside, leaving only a faint trail of dust behind him. The days rolled by like that. Mistakes, silence, effort, and the vague sense that maybe, just maybe, the land was beginning to tolerate her presence. Yet the loneliness was real, fierce. It crept into the corners of her nights and wrapped itself around her. When she sat alone near the kitchen hearth, she missed voices. She missed her mother's gentle hum while weaving, her father's deep laugh echoing off canyon walls. Out here, the only echo was the wind. Still, someone was watching her, quietly, constantly. Clara, the little girl, lingered at the edges of every room like a shy deer. She never got close enough to touch, but never far enough to disappear. She sketched in that worn little book, pages filled with faint pencil lines. Sometimes Nita caught the girl glancing up at her, eyes quick, curious, cautious. One evening, while sweeping the floor, Nita noticed a torn scrap of paper on the table. A small drawing, a woman with long dark braids standing beside the water well. The lines were delicate but intentional. Nita recognized the image immediately. It was her. She didn't mention it to Clara, didn't move the drawing. She simply paused for a beat, letting her chest warm in a quiet way she hadn't felt in months. The land was still hard. The work was still heavy. The house still held shadows from the woman who came before her. But something was changing, slow as winter ice melting, steady as dawn rising over the mountains. By the end of the week, as she carried yet another bucket of water toward the kitchen, Nita looked out across the vast stretch of prairie. The wind tugged at her braid, and she felt, in her bones, the deep truth the frontier had whispered since she arrived. To earn trust out here, you had to stay long enough for the soil to remember your footsteps. And she intended to. The storm rolled in without warning, thick, brooding clouds piling over the prairie like a herd of black cattle stampeding across the sky. The wind turned sharp, rattling the loose boards of the barn, and making the old weather vane cry out in metallic protest. By late evening, the world outside the ranch house had fallen into a restless, eerie darkness. Lightning spidered across the horizon, white and violent, followed by thunder so deep it seemed to rumble through the earth itself. Inside the small kitchen, the lantern flame flickered with every gust sneaking in through the cracks. Nita sat near the hearth, mending a worn doeskin coat, her fingers moving with steady precision despite the rising storm. She worked quietly, humming under her breath, a soft, low tune her mother once sang during long winter nights. Another thunderclap cracked open the sky. From the hallway came the sound of quick footsteps. Nita lifted her head just in time to see Clara slip into the kitchen, clutching her sketchbook tight against her chest. The little girl's eyes were wide, too wide, and her breath quivered like a frightened colt. "It's loud," Clara whispered, almost inaudible beneath the roar of wind. Nita set the coat aside and stood, her movement slow and deliberate so she wouldn't startle the child. She extended one arm toward the hearth. "Come," she said gently. "Sit by the fire. The flames will protect us." The words weren't grand, but they carried a calm strength, ancient, rooted. Clara hesitated only a moment before stepping closer. The next flash of lightning lit up the room, and she flinched hard. Without thinking, Nita opened both arms. Clara walked straight into them. The girl settled beside her, small and trembling, the sketchbook still pressed between them. Nita wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled the wool blanket down from the chair, draping it over Clara's back. The child's breathing slowed, not fully steady, but softer now, as if Nita had anchored her in place. Another boom rolled across the prairie. Nita felt Clara tense. So she began to speak in a low rhythmic voice, almost like reciting a prayer. "In my people's stories," she said, eyes fixed on the dancing fire, "thunder is the sound of the great riders crossing the sky. The spirits who watch over the land, their horses are strong and their hooves shake the clouds." Clara lifted her head slightly. They're not angry?" "No," Nita whispered. "They are guiding the storm, keeping balance, telling the world to wake, to breathe, to grow stronger." Clara leaned in closer, her head resting lightly against Nita's shoulder. "And the lightning?" she asked, voice barely above a breath. "That is the flash of their spears," Nita replied, "protecting the earth from darkness." For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Clara's small body relaxed, completely, trustingly. The tightness in her shoulders loosened, her fingers uncurled. She let out a long sigh and nestled deeper into Nita's side, lulled by her warmth, her scent of sage and smoke, her steady heartbeat. Within minutes, Clara's eyes fluttered closed. She slept, just like that. A child who had known only fear and silence since her mother died, finally slept. And she slept not in her bed, not alone under covers, but against the shoulder of an Apache woman she'd barely spoken to. The fire crackled softly. Nita adjusted the blanket around the girl and rested her cheek lightly against Clara's hair. Her own heart tightened, not with pain, but with something tender and unfamiliar, something she didn't dare name yet. A floorboard creaked. Nita looked up. Cole stood in the shadows by the kitchen doorway, rain dripping from his hat, his coat soaked through from securing the animals outside. His breath was still heavy from fighting the storm, but none of that showed on his face. Not compared to what he was looking at now. His daughter, sleeping, safe, held. Something raw flickered in Cole's eyes, something he fought hard to swallow. The storm outside was fierce, but the one inside him was fiercer. Gratitude, relief, the ache of remembering his wife, and something new he wasn't ready for. He didn't step forward, didn't speak. He only watched, chest rising slowly, as if afraid any sound might break the fragile peace in the room. Nita didn't move. She met his gaze steadily across the glow of the hearth. For a brief, trembling moment, the roar of the storm faded. There was only firelight, and the three of them. A woman who'd lost her tribe, a child who'd lost her mother, a man who'd lost his heart. And between them, unspoken, fragile but real, something began to grow. A seed, small, dangerous, full of promise. The seed of a new family, planted in the middle of the storm. Morning broke gently over the prairie, soft as a whispered apology after a long, brutal night. The storm had blown itself out, leaving the world washed clean and trembling beneath a pale gold sky. Sunlight seeped through the cracks of the ranch house, painting warm stripes across the kitchen floor. Cole stood quietly near the doorway, boots still damp, his shoulders stiff from a sleepless night. He watched Clara curled on the woven rug near the hearth, still wrapped under Nita's wool blanket. Her small chest rose and fell in the steady rhythm of deep, peaceful sleep. It had been months since he'd seen his daughter sleep without crying, without waking up gasping for her mother. The sight hit him like a blow he hadn't braced for. Nita was beside the stove, tending the low fire, her motions slow and deliberate. The faint smell of sage lingered around her, weaving through the warmth of the kitchen. She didn't speak when she sensed Cole behind her, but she acknowledged him with a slight tilt of her head. He stepped closer, rubbing the back of his neck. Did she wake at all during the night? No, Nita answered softly. She slept like the storm had carried her fears away. Her voice was calm, grounded, like river stone warmed by the sun. Cole exhaled, long and ragged. The quiet of the morning amplified every feeling he'd tried to bury for years. He rested a hand on the back of a chair, grounding himself. She used to sleep like that, he murmured, staring at Clara. Before Sarah died, the name slipped out before he could think better of it. Sarah, his wife, the woman he loved, the woman he buried, the ghost he'd been trying not to see standing in every shadow. Nita didn't turn away. She didn't step closer either. She simply waited, still, present, giving him space to speak without pressure, without pity. Cole closed his eyes for a moment. Sarah had a laugh that could warm a room better than any fire. Clara was her shadow. When Sarah got sick, His throat tightened. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't save her. The confession cracked something open inside him. When she died, he continued, voice low and worn, it was like my heart just stopped. Like the part of me that could feel anything got buried with her. I told myself that was it, that I couldn't care again. He lifted his eyes to Nita. She didn't flinch from the ache in them. But last night, he swallowed, the words dragging out of him like a truth he had feared to name. Last night, when I saw Clara in your arms, peaceful for the first time in so long, his voice dropped to a whisper. When you walked into this house, I felt alive. Silence followed, thick, warm, full. The fire crackled. Outside, a blue jay landed on the fence and called once, sharply as though urging the world to listen. Nita took in his confession without shying away. There was no triumph in her eyes, no desire to replace a ghost, no foolish romantic spark. Only understanding, only her quiet, grounded strength, the kind the mountains carried through centuries of wind and wildfire. She stepped closer, her voice steady as the earth beneath her feet. I did not come to take anyone's place, she said. I came to find my own. The words settled between them like a promise. Cole reached for her cautiously, as one reaches for a wild creature. Slow, respectful, reverent. She allowed the touch, lifting her chin as his hand cupped the side of her face. The warmth of his palm met the warmth of her skin, and for a moment, everything in him stopped fighting. She was not Sarah, and he was no longer the man who believed his heart was dead. Nita's breath mingled with his. Neither rushed, neither broke the fragile, hesitant magic of that shared moment. Cole leaned down first. Nita rose to meet him. Their lips touched in a kiss that wasn't hurried or desperate, but steady, anchored, like two people finally breathing after years underwater. It was slow, sure, shaped by grief and hope in equal measure. A kiss that said, I see you, I remember you, I choose this moment with you. When they parted, the world felt different, quieter, fuller, waiting. Across the room, Clara stirred in her sleep, unaware that her father and the Apache woman beside him had just crossed an invisible boundary. The storm outside had passed, but inside the ranch house, something new had begun. Soft, fragile, and strong enough to change everything. The prairie afternoon stretched warm and quiet, the kind of stillness that followed days of storm. Under the lone cottonwood tree behind the house, Clara sat cross-legged in the shade, her old sketchbook propped against her knees. A soft breeze lifted strands of her light hair as she dipped her head over the page, pencil moving in quick, confident strokes. She was drawing again. Ever since that night by the hearth, Clara's pencil had rarely left her hand. Her sketches filled page after page. Nita kneeling by the fire, Nita tossing hay to the horses, Nita with her braid whipping behind her as she rode out to check the fence line. And there were drawings of Cole as well. Cole mending posts, Cole carrying buckets, Cole standing tall against the orange wash of sunset. But what struck Nita most was the way Clara had started drawing them together, side by side, not touching, but close enough that it meant something. Nita approached quietly, the grass whispering beneath her moccasins. Clara didn't look up immediately, but she didn't shrink away either. That alone was a miracle Cole noticed daily. "What are you sketching today?" Nita asked gently. Clara turned the book just enough for her to see. 3 figures under a low roof of clouds. Nita at the stove, Cole outside fixing a fence, and Clara watching through the window. A triangle, separate but connected. Nita's chest tightened in a way she didn't expect. Later that afternoon, Nita gathered strips of soft leather and brought them out to the tree. "Come," she called softly. "Let me show you something." Clara scooted closer, curiosity pulling her forward. Nita sat beside her and held up the leather. "In my people," she said, letting the words drift like wind over tall grass, "children learn to braid these before they learn to ride. These straps hold tools, carry stories, and keep what we love close." Clara watched her hands intently as Nita looped the leather over and under, forming a neat, strong braid. Then she placed the strips into the girl's small hands. "Try." Clara did. Her first braid was crooked, loose at the ends. She frowned. "It will come," Nita soothed. "Everything worth learning takes time." They practiced until the sun dipped lower. Between lessons, Nita showed Clara how to listen to the wind, how the sharp, dry whistle across the grass meant heat coming, and how the low hum against the barn walls meant rain. Clara listened with bright, hungry eyes. After a while, the girl grew quiet, her fingers fidgeting with the braid she'd made. She stared at it, then at Nita, then back again, as if weighing a question too heavy for her age. "Nita?" she murmured. "Yes, little one?" Clara's voice cracked. If your horse ran far away one morning, would you go after it? Would you leave?" The word struck Nita like an arrow. Clara wasn't asking about a horse. She was asking about herself, about being left again, about the fear that had lived in her since the day she lost her mother. Nita's breath caught. Gently, carefully, she reached out and pulled the girl into her arms. Clara crumpled against her, small hands gripping the front of Nita's shirt. "No," Nita whispered into her hair. "I would not leave you, not for a horse, not for the wind, not for anything that does not love me back." Clara trembled once, then melted into the embrace, clinging tight. When she finally pulled away, her cheeks were pink, but her eyes held a steadiness Nita hadn't seen before. She picked up her sketchbook with determined little fingers and flipped to a new page. Her pencil moved swiftly, lines forming shapes forming something whole. When she turned the book toward Nita, the breath rushed out of Nita's chest. 3 figures, not separated this time, but holding hands. A family. Cole's tall frame on one side, Clara small but bright in the middle, and Nita, braids long, posture strong, at the other end. The prairie stretched around them in warm colors. Nita touched the edge of the page, overwhelmed by the simple, honest beauty of it. Clara looked up at her, hesitation trembling across her lips before she pushed the fear aside and spoke. Her first direct words to Nita since she arrived at the ranch. "You'll stay, won't you?" The wind quieted. The cottonwood leaves stilled. Even the distant horses seemed to pause. Nita met her gaze, her voice soft but unwavering. "I will stay." Clara's smile, small, shy, glowing, was worth more than any sunrise on the prairie. And somewhere behind them, watching from the barn door, Cole felt the ground shift under his boots. Not with fear this time, but with hope. The sun was sinking low, casting the ranch in a warm, honey-gold light that seemed to soften every rough edge on the land. The prairie glowed as though it held fire beneath its grass. A flock of birds swept across the horizon in a graceful arc, their silhouettes dark against the fading sky. Nita stood beside Cole near the fence line, both of them watching Clara pump her small legs on the wooden swing hanging from the old cottonwood. Cole had built that swing himself, measured the wood, carved the seat, secured the rope. Each knot carried the weight of a father who remembered his daughter's laughter before grief took its place. Now Clara laughed again, soft, free. The sound drifted across the yard like wind bells. Nita felt the warmth of it settle inside her chest. Cole's elbow brushed hers as he shifted his stance. He wasn't a man who fidgeted, not normally, But in that moment, his hand went to his pocket, then back out, then to his pocket again. Nita noticed the movement, though she pretended not to. Finally, he exhaled and turned to her fully. "I've been working on something," he said, his voice low, steady, but threaded with nerves he didn't bother to hide. He opened his palm. Resting there was a thin braid of leather, soft, warm from his touch, cut from an old set of reins and woven with care. Not even, not perfect, but honest. Nita stared at it, her throat tightening. "It's not much," Cole murmured. "Not gold, not church-worthy, but it's what I can give." He paused, searching her eyes with a quiet intensity. "When you came here, I didn't know what would change. I didn't expect Clara to smile again. I didn't expect the house to feel alive." He swallowed hard. "And I sure as hell didn't expect my heart to wake up." Nita's breath hitched. Cole held the small leather loop out to her. "If you want," he said softly, "this can be our home. Not just mine, not just Clara's, ours." The wind stirred the grass. Somewhere far off, a horse snorted from the barn. The sky deepened into shades of copper and rose, the kind of sunset that made the world feel old and sacred. Nita reached for the leather. Her fingers brushed his, warm calluses against warm skin, and the touch sent a quiet tremor through both of them. She closed her hand around the braid. Her voice, when it came, was soft but sure, the kind of voice that carried truth. "Home is not where I was born," she said. "It is where I am allowed to stay." The words struck deep, clean and true as a struck bell. Cole didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes told everything. Gratitude, longing, a fierce tenderness he'd kept locked away since losing Sarah. They stood side by side, facing the sunset, their hands brushing until Cole finally reached out and took hers fully. His grip wasn't tight, but steady, like he was anchoring himself to something he didn't want to lose. Nita intertwined her fingers with his, accepting the weight of that promise with her own steady strength. Clara slowed on the swing, dragging her feet across the dirt to stop. She looked up, saw their joined hands, and a bright smile lit her small face. So pure, so relieved, as if the world finally made sense again. She ran toward them, hair flying, boots kicking up dust. "Look, Papa!" she shouted. "Nita's wearing the braid!" Cole lifted her up with one arm, placing her between them. Clara grabbed their joined hands and squeezed, making them laugh despite themselves. The three of them stood together, framed by the fading glow of the horizon. Father, daughter, the woman who healed wounds, none of them could speak aloud. No vows, no minister, no witnesses but the prairie itself. And yet, it was a binding, a promise more solid than iron. As twilight settled over the ranch, Cole leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper, meant only for her. "You're part of this family now." Nita rested her forehead briefly against his, letting the truth of that settle deep in her bones. She didn't need ceremonies. She didn't need papers. She didn't need anyone's approval. In this land of dust and sky, of wind and wild grass, love didn't need to be loud to be real. It only needed to endure. And in the quiet warmth of that western sunset, a new family was formed, steady, unspoken, and strong enough to weather anything the frontier could throw at them. Morning rose softly over Rainer Ranch, the kind of morning that felt almost sacred in its quiet. A thin veil of white mist clung to the fence rails, weaving through the posts like threads of pale silk. From the corral came the steady scrape of a horse pawing at the dirt, impatient for feed and sunlight. Nita stepped out onto the porch, her breath forming pale clouds in the cold air. She carried bundles of dried herbs, sage, wild mint, strips of sweet grass, and hung them along the beams of the porch. They swayed gently in the breeze, releasing a faint, calming scent that settled over the ranch like a blessing. Behind her, Clara darted across the yard, laughter ringing through the crisp morning. The girl's boots kicked up dew from the grass as she chased a blue ribbon tied to a stick, pretending it was a wild Mustang only she could tame. For the first time in what felt like forever, her joy was unburdened, light, whole. Cole was near the barn, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tightening hinges on the stall door. He paused every so often to glance at Clara, then at Nita, a quiet satisfaction tugging gently at the corners of his mouth. There was nothing grand about the moment. No declarations, no ceremony, no witness. Just a man fixing a door, a child laughing, a woman making a home in her own quiet ways. But together, it felt like the world settling into its rightful place. Inside the house, the smell of strong coffee drifted from the stove. Outside, chickens scratched lazily in the dust. A hawk circled overhead. In every small detail, life was stitching itself into something steady and meaningful. Nita finished tying the last bundle of sweetgrass and stepped off the porch. Cole straightened as she approached, wiping sawdust from his hands onto his jeans. "You've made this place smell better than it ever has," he said with a half smile. Dry, simple, but warm. Nita shrugged lightly. "The land gives us what we need. I just hang it up." Cole held her gaze a moment longer, his eyes softening. The prairie wind tugged gently at the loose strands of her braid. For a man who once believed his heart had died with his wife, the realization that it beat strongly now was something he still carried with awe. In town, folks had begun to accept Nita, slowly but surely. They nodded at her in the general store. They called her by name rather than the Apache girl. Some brought jars for her salves, others asked about weather signs or ailing livestock. Nita earned their trust the same way she earned her place on the ranch. By showing up every day, working harder than anyone, and never backing down from the sharp edges of life. People respected resilience, and she had it in abundance. Clara soon grew tired of chasing her ribbon and settled under the cottonwood with her sketchbook. The pages fluttered in the wind as she drew. Nita could see from here the outline of the tree, the barn, the three of them standing together. Cole walked toward Nita slowly, not with urgency but with certainty. He slipped his arms around her from behind, pulling her gently against his chest. She leaned into him without hesitation, her hands resting over his. Together they watched Clara sketch, the girl humming softly, occasionally glancing up to make sure they were still there. They were, and she knew they would be. Nita breathed in the scent of sawdust and leather from Cole's shirt. His chin brushed the top of her hair as he whispered, "Does it feel like home yet?" She didn't answer with words, not at first. Instead, she covered his hands with hers, grounding him the way he grounded her. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, steady, shaped by the wisdom of wind and canyon stone. "Home doesn't need to be named," she murmured. "When a place claims your heart, you feel it." Cole tightened his embrace. "The land chose us, didn't it?" Nita nodded gently. "The wind watched us. In our hearts, they found where they belonged." The prairie stretched in every direction, golden under the rising sun. The house behind them creaked softly, as if settling comfortably into its foundation. Clara's pencil scratched across the page in quick, happy strokes. And in that quiet, perfect morning, none of them needed to speak the word home. They were living it,